Gentle viewers, and welcome to another frightening episode of Alistair Reviews It. Today I am going to be doing my spooky wrap-up, talking about the books I read for this October and letting you know my thoughts about them. I would love to know what you guys decided to pick up, and if you guys decided to pick up any of these books, what your thoughts of them were. Without further ado, so I am a huge Practical Magic fan of the movie, and I was like, this year is the year to actually pick up the book. And so I picked up the book and I read it and I loved it. I actually really liked the book. But I do think it's one of those rare occasions when the movie was better than the book. I felt like the movie edited down like a lot of the book. However, the book kind of felt like I was watching an extended version of the movie, which was really nice. This book, like the movie, follows the two Owen sisters as they grow up and they face challenges that include love, marriage, children, and what to do when you come from a long line of witches. It's considered to be magical realism, not fantasy, though I think it's shelved maybe in both places, because this book takes a lot of beliefs from religion and the Wicca faith, so it's magical realism. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a perfect vibe for this time of year, and I think next year I'm going to read one of the sequels, which are all prequels. Next, I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I love the Netflix adaptation of this. I've realized that they took a lot of creative liberties that weren't in this book. This book is a lot more like the Haunting movie that I think it was the 2000 Haunting movie. It was the adaptation of this book. It's a lot more like that, except the Haunting movie was really weird. I just watched it recently. It's a very weird movie. This was a lot slower paced. It was a lot more cerebral than I expected, and I actually really enjoyed reading it. I think it gave me a very haunted vibe, like very spooky vibe while I was reading it. However, it was a lot slower paced, even though it's a pretty short book. If you're going into this book thinking that you're going to get The Haunting of Hill House, you're going to be disappointed. But if you kind of just fresh faced go into this book, it's not too bad, honestly. It's pretty good. I think that it could have been a little chunkier, and I think that Shirley Jackson left out a lot of what could have been explained or expanded upon and would have made this book even better. It is a horror classic, and I did like it. I also read Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This book takes place in Los Angeles and surrounds a Latino community that all descend from witches or brujos. And this book follows Yadriel around Dia de los Muertos, where he's a brujo, he's a brujex who is summoning a ghost, and then he summons the ghost, and he can't get rid of the ghost. It's a trans book also. He's a trans man, and I actually really enjoyed it. So I think I really liked the setting. The setting was so good. You got a lot of details about Dia de los Muertos. You got a lot of good characterization. I think all of the characters that Aiden Thomas wrote felt super unique, and they were their own person. Maritza was my favorite. So the plotting wasn't my favorite in this book, but I know that he is planning on having sequels, and I'm hoping that he expands upon some things that he just touched upon in this book. Next, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and this book follows Noemi as she leaves Mexico City to go visit her cousin who sent her a cryptic letter in the mail, and she basically goes to a English countryside home in Mexico, which, let me tell you, as a Mexican, it does happen. And so it's almost like an English Mexican vibe of a horror or a horror thriller book. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It's not one of my favorites. I really wish that I could have read a translated version in Spanish, because I really just wanted to read in my native language. But a lot of what's in here is Spanish and also translated for English speaking people. I enjoyed it. Wasn't my favorite read of October, but was definitely a worthwhile read. Next, I read The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, and I don't know why I still have one of the pages bookmarked. This is a fantasy horror that takes place in a world much like our own, in a Salem-esque setting, where this biracial witch finds out that she is connected to other witches in this puritanical society. So you kind of see how she deals with this religion, her family, and some pretty bad patriarchal things that are going on in here. I think as a society, we've gotten really into stories that take down the patriarchy, and sometimes it can be badly done, and sometimes it can be really, really well done. And I think that this is one of those examples where it was really, really well done. It's not too spooky if you're gonna read it. It's not too scary. It just gives you kind of horror vibes while you're reading it, and it is a fantasy as well. I actually really liked it. Both Mexican Gothic and this are on the Goodreads Choice Awards for horror right now. They decided to shelve this one on horror instead of fantasy, which I think is good. And I think I was going to pick this one. However, I just finished the Southern Book Club's Guide to Killing Vampires by Grady Hendrickson. And let me tell you, I was bitten by this book. It was so good, and I didn't think it was going to be good. This was a buddy read of mine and Ian Carlos Crawford from Slayerfest '98, and I wasn't even supposed to finish it so soon. It was just one of those books that you're reading and then you just can't stop reading. And let me tell you, this horror is so good in this book. The characterization is so good in this book. The setting, it's just these 1980s, 1990s housewives dealing with vampires in their towns, and none of their husbands are believing them. And they're in a book club, and it's so good. It is actually so good. And I thought it was gonna be a lot more campy. I thought this was gonna be like a campy read, like a campy horror read, but it isn't. I mean, it has slight bits of camp, but just like it's so good. It follows Patricia Campbell as they move to a North Carolina town called Pirates Cove. Her husband is a psychologist, and she has two young kids, and she joins a book club. In this book club, all they read, for the most part, well, they read a lot of different genres, but for the most part, like 70% of what they read is true crime. And then there's a mysterious person who moves into their neighborhood who has a lot of these qualities of these, serial killers that you see in these true crime novels. And Patricia's like, this seems kind of sus. And everybody else is like, no, but he's a neighbor. He's fine. Meanwhile, it's not fine. It's not fine at all. And it's actually not so fine that it's so, so great. Oh, it's so satisfying. I don't think I've been this hyped about a book since I read Gideon the Ninth, I think. Which wasn't too long ago. So I think 2020 has actually been a pretty good year for books. Last, I know I said I'd read House of Leaves, but I didn't. And my husband would have loved for me to read this book because it's one of his favorite horror books. But I just didn't make it to this book this year. So this is going to be my priority for reading for next Halloween. I'm not big into horror or true crime or anything like this, but I have to say, I have been pleasantly surprised this October. This is the first time I've ever decided to delve into horror as a genre. I mostly think about it as a subgenre of fantasy, unless it's more of a thriller. So like I would consider this to be a subgenre of fantasy. I would consider this to be a subgenre of fantasy. I'd consider Hill House to be a subgenre of fantasy. So it's not too outside of the realm of what I read. I mean, I did read all the Demonata books and Circuit of Freak, and those are horror fantasy too, but I have been very pleasantly surprised this year. Very pleasantly surprised. Let me know if any of you had any horror reads. If you guys watched any horror movies, what do people think of The Craft? I like the first three-fourths of the movie, or first two-thirds. What other? Oh, and The Witches with Anne Hathaway was great. Was great. I loved it too. So those, if anybody's looking for movies to watch today to round out the spooky time, I'd say The Witches would be my pick. Witches, or Halloween 2018, or The Craft if you want to go that way. But honestly, I would watch the first craft, and it might even make this next craft, the craft legacy, that much more satisfying. I feel like I kind of went on a tangent. But anyways, let me know what your spooky reads were for this Halloween. What are you guys doing today? Please stay safe out there and have a frightening Halloween. Adios, gentle viewers. See you next time.